Welcome to another deep dive. This time, you've given us some seriously cool sources on this guy, Paulo Miki.
This is pretty interesting.
We've got academic papers, historical accounts, even some original Japanese texts.
Wow.
It's going to be like stepping back in time to 16th century Japan, a time of major change.
Yeah.
Like huge shifts in society and religion. I'm ready to learn more.
Yeah, me too. It's amazing how one person can stand out in such a crazy period.
Exactly. So who was this Paulo Miki guy anyway?
Well, Paulo Miki was a Japanese Jesuit, one of the 26 martyrs of Japan.
Martyrs.
Yeah, he was crucified in 1597, but what's really interesting is his background. He wasn't always a Christian. He was actually raised in a wealthy family, totally immersed in Buddhism, but something changed, and he ended up converting and joining the Society of Jesus.
Whoa, hold on. What made him convert to Christianity? That seems like a huge jump, considering his upbringing. Was it like a sudden thing, or did his beliefs gradually change over time?
That's where the sources get really interesting. They suggest it wasn't just one thing, but a bunch of factors. For one, he met these Jesuit missionaries who were spreading Christianity in Japan at the time.
I see.
Miki was known for being a really good speaker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people said his sermons were captivating. But what's really striking is his conversion happened during this crazy period of social and political upheaval in Japan.
Upheaval. You mean in 16th century Japan?
Yeah.
What was going on that might have influenced Miki's spiritual journey?
Well, Japan was changing a lot. After decades of civil war, these powerful feudal lords like Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, they were all fighting for control, trying to unify the country under their rule. This power struggle changed everything, including religion.
That makes sense. It sounds like an environment where people might question their old beliefs and be more open to new ideas. Do you think the political instability created like a spiritual void that Christianity could fill?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely possible that the uncertainty and chaos of that time made people, including Miki, search for meaning and comfort in new belief systems. The sources show a lot of people felt disillusioned with the existing powers, both political and religious.
Right, so Christianity shows up in Japan at a crucial moment. But did people welcome it, or was there resistance from the beginning?
Initially, there was some tolerance. Some feudal lords even saw Christianity as a way to strengthen their power, by making alliances with European powers. But this tolerance didn't last.
I bet.
As Christianity gained followers, it caught the eye of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the warlord who finally unified Japan.
Toyotomi Hideyoshi. From what I know about him, I wouldn't think he'd be cool with a foreign religion messing with his authority. How'd he react to the spread of Christianity?
You're spot on about Hideyoshi's tolerance levels. As he gained more power, he saw Christianity as a threat to his rule and Japan's stability. He was especially worried about Christians' loyalty to the Pope, who was a foreign authority.
Makes sense. From his point of view, Christianity must have looked like a dangerous foreign influence that could weaken his authority and maybe even lead to foreign powers interfering in Japan's affairs.
Exactly. And reports of European colonialism in other parts of the world made things even worse.
Right.
Hideyoshi had seen how Europeans used religion as an excuse for conquest and exploitation. He didn't want that to happen to Japan.
So what did he do? Did he immediately ban Christianity, or is there a gradual increase in tension?
At first, he was cautious.
Okay.
He issued warnings and limited missionaries' activities, but as Christianity spread and his suspicions grew, he took stronger action. Finally, in 1587, he officially banned Christianity.
That's a big turning point, not only for Miki, but for every Christian in Japan. What happened after the decree? Did the persecution start right away?
Well, the ban was a big escalation, but enforcing it wasn't consistent. Some local lords liked Christianity and ignored the ban, letting people practice secretly. But in other areas, it was brutal.
So it was unpredictable. It must have been terrifying for Japanese Christians. What about Paulo Miki? How did he handle things? Did he hide, or did he keep preaching openly?
It seems like he had a difficult choice to make,
Yeah.
Stay quiet and protect himself, or keep spreading his faith despite the risks. But knowing him, he wasn't the type to back down from a challenge.
I can see that. Considering how passionate he was, I doubt he'd want to stay silent. Did he keep preaching, defying the ban?
Yes, he did. Miki and lots of other Japanese Christians kept practicing their faith in secret. They had these gatherings, often in remote places, to avoid being caught. But Miki wanted to do more than just practice privately. He felt compelled to spread the message of Christianity, even in such dangerous times.
That's incredibly brave. Knowing the risks and choosing to keep preaching under such pressure, It must have taken so much courage. I'm sure that decision eventually led to trouble with the authorities.
Exactly. His defiance, his refusal to stop spreading his faith, made him a target. And what's interesting is that his fame, his reputation as a great speaker, might have unintentionally led to his downfall.
Wait, so his fame worked against him. How? Did it make him easier to find?
Probably. His fame as a preacher, even if it was a secret within the Christian community, made it hard for him to stay hidden. The authorities might have been searching for him specifically, seeing him as a key figure in spreading Christianity.
Fascinating. So we have a man of faith, driven by his convictions, living in an increasingly hostile environment. And his own fame, meant for good, becomes a liability. I can't wait to hear what happens next.
This sets the stage for the next chapter, a chapter filled with betrayal, imprisonment, and a terrifying journey that ultimately sealed his fate.
So last time, we were talking about how Paulo Miki had this difficult decision, keep preaching in this dangerous environment or stay silent. He chose to keep going, but it sounds like that ultimately led to his capture. How did they catch him? Did they just happen to find one of their secret meetings?
Unfortunately, no. It wasn't random at all. The historical accounts say that someone betrayed Miki.
What?
Yeah, one of his own followers, scared for their own safety, told the authorities where they were meeting.
Wow, a betrayal. That's awful. Miki was so dedicated to spreading this message of love and forgiveness, and to be betrayed by someone he trusted like that. I can't imagine how devastating that must have been.
Absolutely. Betrayal by someone you consider a brother or sister in your faith, it's deeply painful, really personal. And for the whole Christian community, I mean, that must have sent shockwaves of fear and suspicion.
I bet. So what happened after the authorities knew where they were? Did they go and arrest Miki right away?
Yeah, they acted fast. They arrested Miki and a bunch of other Christians who were at the meeting. The sources describe it as pretty brutal. They didn't care about the Christians' pleas for mercy or anything.
That's rough. So once they had him, what did they do? Did they execute him right then?
No, they didn't execute him immediately. Instead, they made Miki and the other Christians go on this long and difficult journey. They forced them to march from Kyoto all the way to Nagasaki.
Wait, how far is that?
Over 600 miles.
600 miles. On foot. And this is 16th century Japan.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly grueling. Was this just their way of transporting prisoners, or was there something more to it?
Oh, it was way more than just transporting prisoners. They planned this whole thing to humiliate the Christians and scare anyone else from following them, make an example of them. The authorities wanted everyone to see what would happen if they defied the ban on Christianity.
So a psychological warfare.
Yeah.
A way to break them and make other Christians afraid. Can you describe what that journey would have been like for Miki and the others?
The sources describe it as brutal, made even worse because it happened during the winter. They had to walk for miles every day, exposed to the cold with very little food or water, and they were often paraded through towns and villages where people would mock and abuse them.
I can't even imagine. To be betrayed, imprisoned, and then forced to endure all that hardship, all for their faith. That's an unbelievable test of their strength and their belief.
It really was. But in the middle of all that suffering, the sources talk about Miki and the other prisoners' remarkable resilience. They kept praying, singing hymns, and comforting each other. Their faith, instead of disappearing, seemed to get even stronger through the adversity.
That's incredible, to find that kind of strength and comfort in your faith, even in the worst possible circumstances. I bet their unwavering faith must have affected the people who saw them on their journey.
You're right. The accounts mention that people along the route were really moved by their resilience. Some even converted to Christianity because they saw their steadfast faith as proof of something truly extraordinary.
Wow. So even while being punished and humiliated, they were spreading their faith without even meaning to. It seems like the authorities' plan to make an example of them backfired in a way.
It's an interesting paradox. Persecution often has the opposite effect, making the movement it's trying to suppress stronger. By trying to silence the Christians, the authorities might have actually spread their message and inspired even more people to join them.
So after that grueling journey, they finally make it to Nagasaki. What was waiting for them there? We know they were going to be executed, but I want to hear the details. The sources mention crucifixion, but how did that work in 16th century Japan?
Crucifixion was a pretty common way of executing people back then, especially for criminals and people seen as threats to the state.
Right.
It was a brutal public punishment meant to inflict as much pain and humiliation as possible. In Maki's case, they chose a spot where everyone could see a hill overlooking Nagasaki Harbor.
A hill overlooking the harbor.
Yeah.
Why there? Was it just about making a spectacle of it, or was there a deeper meaning behind that location?
Choosing that spot was no accident. Nagasaki was a major port and a hub for Christian activity in Japan. By having the execution there, the authorities wanted to send a very clear message. Christianity was not welcome, especially not where it had taken root.
So powerful statement. This was their last brutal act of suppression. As they were being led to their execution, knowing what was coming, did Miki or any of the others waver in their faith?
Not at all. The historical accounts you shared describe incredible courage and conviction. Even as they were being nailed to the crosses, Miki and the other martyrs continued to pray, sing hymns, and comfort one another. Their faith stayed strong even in the face of such unimaginable suffering.
It's hard to comprehend that level of faith, facing such a horrific death and still finding the strength to comfort others. What about Miki? How did he act in those final moments?
People who saw it said Miki was incredibly calm and composed, even while being crucified. He used his last moments to give a powerful sermon, urging forgiveness for those who were persecuting them and reaffirming his belief in God. It wasn't about anger or resentment, but about love and hope, even as he faced death.
What a powerful image. Facing his own death and still preaching a message of love and forgiveness. That must have had a huge impact on everyone who witnessed it.
It did. Miki's final sermon became a symbol of his faith and belief in forgiveness. Even people who weren't Christians were moved by his words. His death, instead of ending Christianity in Japan, seemed to make it even stronger.
So we've talked about Miki's capture, the awful journey to Nagasaki and his execution. But his story doesn't end there, right? We know he's considered a saint in the Catholic Church. But how did that happen? And what about his legacy in Japan? How is he remembered there, centuries after his death? Last time we were talking about Paulo Miki's capture and execution in Nagasaki. It's clear his story didn't end there, though. We know he's a recognized saint in the Catholic Church. But what does that mean, really? Like, what were the steps to make him a saint, and why is that recognition so important, even centuries later?
Well, sainthood in the Catholic Church is a huge honor. It's only for people who lived truly holy lives and had incredible faith. It's definitely not something they give out easily. They have this whole process called canonization to officially declare someone a saint. It involves a ton of research and even confirmation of miracles that people say happened because of that person's intercession.
So it's more than symbolic. It's a serious process with a lot of theological meaning. What about Paulo Miki's case? When did he become a saint, and what led to that decision?
Paulo Miki, along with the other 25 martyrs of Japan, they were all canonized in 1862 by Pope Pius IX.
Oh, wow.
And that was more than 250 years after their execution. It wasn't just recognizing their martyrdom, they were also acknowledging how important they were to the spread of Christianity in Japan and around the world.
That's a long time for recognition. It shows how powerful their story is, how it lasted through the centuries and eventually led to sainthood. But what about their legacy in Japan? You said earlier that Christianity never really took hold there. How do people remember Paulo Miki in a country where his faith was so brutally suppressed?
It's definitely complicated. Japan's relationship with Christianity has a long history. There were times of tolerance and times of persecution, but the legacy of the 26 martyrs, especially Paulo Miki, it's a part of Japanese culture.
Really? Can you explain that a little? Like, how do they remember him? Are there any traditions or specific places associated with his memory?
Yeah, you'll find shrines and memorials for the martyrs, including Miki, all over Japan, especially in Nagasaki. People from all walks of life visit these places, not just Christians. They're drawn to the story of their courage, their faith, and how they connect to such a pivotal moment in Japanese history.
So even in Japan, his story is bigger than religion. It's part of the national story, one of resistance and resilience that connects with people regardless of what they believe.
Exactly. And it's especially interesting that the Japanese government, even though they were the ones who persecuted Christians in the past, have officially recognized the place where they were executed in Nagasaki as a national historic landmark.
Wow, that's significant. It seems like their perspective has changed. They're willing to acknowledge a difficult part of their past and recognize how important these people were, even though they represented a faith that was seen as dangerous back then.
It really shows how our understanding of history evolves. We come to realize that even people who were once considered enemies can become symbols of courage and conviction. Their stories become part of who we are as a nation.
It's amazing how someone executed for his beliefs can be both a source of religious inspiration and national pride. That says a lot about how lasting his story is. But what is it about Paulo Miki's story, in particular, that still resonates with people centuries later? Why does his story stand out, among so many others, about persecution throughout history?
That's a great question. I think it's partly because of his incredible faith. He refused to give up his beliefs even when faced with such cruelty. It's that level of conviction, facing death with dignity and even forgiving his persecutors, that goes beyond religion and touches on a basic human desire for meaning and purpose when facing suffering.
Yeah. His faith in the face of death is definitely a powerful part of the story. But I also think the historical context is fascinating. This clash between cultures, the fight for religious freedom, these are things that still matter today.
Absolutely. We're still dealing with religious intolerance and persecution around the world. Paulo Miki's story reminds us that the fight for religious freedom, the fight against injustice, is something we're still working on. It shows us that even when things seem impossible, individual acts of courage and conviction can inspire others and make a difference.
It's like a call to action. It challenges us to live with purpose and fight for what we believe in, even when it's hard.
I agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Paulo Miki's incredible life, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've explored the history, his journey, his legacy, but the most important question is this. What would Paulo Miki say to us today? How would he deal with the world we live in now? What would his message of resilience and faith be to people facing their own challenges and struggles for meaning and justice?
That's a powerful question, and it's one I think we all need to consider. His story isn't just about the past. It's asking us to look at ourselves, to think about our own values, and find the courage to live them out, even when the world doesn't seem to care or even tries to stop us.
Exactly. His story challenges us to find our own inner strength, our own dedication to what we believe in, and use it to make the world a better place.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Paulo Miki's extraordinary life. It's been a journey through history, faith, and the amazing resilience of the human spirit. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.